Hey everyone. Dear friends, this is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we'll be examining a horrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. In the age of social media, where the line between reality and virtual life is increasingly blurred, many seek fame and validation through the lens of a camera. For some, this pursuit becomes an obsession, overshadowing all else, including moral boundaries and the value of human life. This is the story of Abigail White and Bradley Lewis, a young couple whose tumultuous relationship, fueled by Abby's quest for online stardom, ended in a tragic and horrifying manner. Abby, a self-proclaimed fake Barbie, had built a substantial following on the platform OnlyFans, where she shared explicit photos and cultivated an image of a perfect life with her boyfriend Bradley. However, behind the carefully crafted facade lay a dark and disturbing truth. A toxic relationship marred by abuse, infidelity, and Abby's increasingly unstable behavior. As the couple's problems escalated, their once promising future together unraveled, leading to a fateful confrontation that would shock the entire nation. The events that transpired on that terrible night in March 2022 not only shattered the lives of those directly involved, but also served as a grim reminder of the dangers lurking behind the glossy veneer of social media stardom. In this video, we will delve into the troubling story of Abigail White and Bradley Lewis, examining the factors that contributed to the tragedy and the far-reaching consequences of their actions. As we unravel the complex web of their relationship, we will also explore the broader implications of our society's growing obsession with online fame and the potential perils that come with blurring the lines between the real and the virtual world. Abigail White, a young model, gained widespread popularity on the internet thanks to the revealing photos she had been posting on a popular website for several years. The girl created an illusion of a happy relationship with her boyfriend, hiding a horrifying reality behind the perfect picture, which eventually came to light. This tragic story unfolded in 2022 in Bristol, a port city in the southwest of the United Kingdom, home to over 400,000 people. Bristol is known for its high level of prosperity per capita, exceeding the national average. It was here in March 2000 that Bradley Lewis was born, growing up in a loving and close-knit family. His parents, Steve and Rachel Lewis, were decent people who always put family first. From childhood, Bradley was known for his good-naturedness and cheerfulness. Like many English boys, he developed a passion for soccer from a young age and played for a local club while attending St. Stephen's School. Bradley had a wide circle of friends and acquaintances. In his teenage years, he started attending parties, and it was at one of them, at the age of 14, that he met 15-year-old Abigail White. The relationship between Bradley and Abby quickly grew into mutual love, despite the stark differences in their personalities. Unlike the good-natured Bradley, Abby had a difficult character, largely due to her troubled childhood. When the girl was only 2 years old, her parents began to argue frequently, and these conflicts were often accompanied by physical abuse. At the age of 4, Abby experienced her parents' divorce. Her mother took her daughter with her and later found a new man who turned out to be even worse than the girl's biological father, inflicting physical harm not only on his wife, but also on Abby herself. Soon after, the mother decided to send her daughter to live with her grandparents. Abby often got into trouble because of her bad behavior, received low grades, and was expelled from school several times. At the age of 13, she was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with mental and emotional problems and prescribed antidepressants, but Abby's life never improved. Meanwhile, Bradley, after graduating from school and completing courses, started working as a floor layer. Abby, on the other hand, never worked and didn't even try to find a permanent job. Instead, the girl began to earn a decent income on the website OnlyFans. OnlyFans is a platform that allows creators to share any content with subscribers, but has gained a dubious reputation due to its popularity among models who attract fans with explicit photos. This is exactly the type of content Abby decided to publish under the pseudonym Miss CJ, calling herself a fake Barbie. Thanks to the racy photos, the girl quickly gained a large audience of fans, and her income grew rapidly. In the first year alone, Abby earned £50,000 sterling, over $60,000. But this success was short-lived. At the beginning of the second year of her OnlyFans career, her profits plummeted due to competition from new models. Abby lost about 75% of her subscribers, earning only £12,000, about $15,000, for the year. By that time, Bradley and Abby already had 4 children, including one child that the girl had given birth to from another man. Details about the age and gender of the children are kept secret. The young family lived in a small house. Bradley worked hard to provide a decent life for Abby and the children, while his parents always helped the couple and took an active part in raising their grandchildren. Despite the happy photos together that Abby often posted, the couple's real relationship was far from ideal. The girl was using prohibited substances and often came home heavily intoxicated, although she denied having a serious addiction. She complained to family and friends about constant control and cruelty from Bradley, accusing him of regular infidelity. However, loved ones knew this was not true. In fact, it was Abby who cheated on her boyfriend and even had a child with another man. She constantly lied to those around her and complained about Bradley. Friends warned him about the toxicity of the relationship and advised him to run away from Abby, whom they considered a complete psychopath. Bradley's mother was also offended by the girl because of her rudeness and cruelty towards her son. The conflicts in the couple led to the intervention of social services, who forbade Abby to live with Bradley and approach him. The young man moved in with his parents, but Abby continued to call him, control him, and force him to spend nights together, despite the prohibition. The girl was active on social media, posting videos on TikTok where she portrayed herself as a victim and a betrayed mother of many children, publicly humiliating Bradley and portraying him as a monster. In early March 2022, Abby sent a voice message to a friend in which she admitted that she did not trust Bradley, considered him a liar, and was forced to beat the truth out of him. She mentioned that the young man advised her to seek psychological help, and people around them warned about the danger of a lethal outcome in their relationship. Abby expressed confidence in her ability to kill and her willingness to go to prison for it. On March 19th, during another serious argument, the girl stabbed Bradley in the arm with a knife, causing him a severe injury. The young man was forced to urgently seek medical help, but lied to the doctors that he was injured at work, so that Abby would not have problems with the police. After this incident, Bradley decided to end the relationship with the girl, despite their 3 children together. However, he continued to communicate with her, ignoring the recommendations of social services. 6 days later, on Thursday, March 25th, at 8 p.m., a blood-curdling scream from Abby was heard from the house where the White Lewis family lived. She begged for help and asked to call the emergency services. A neighbor, hearing the screams, ran to help and learned from Abby that Bradley was not breathing. Upon entering the house, the woman saw a horrifying scene. The hallway and living room of the house were covered in bloodstains. Bradley was lying unconscious in the kitchen, and a bloody knife was visible on the radiator. The frightened neighbor immediately called the police. Soon, her husband arrived, who also witnessed the gruesome scene. Fortunately, at that moment, Abby and Bradley's children were visiting the young man's parents. When the police and medics arrived at the scene, they tried to provide assistance to the victim. Bloody traces were scattered all over the first floor of the house. Law enforcement officers found a shirt, a mop, and other items with bloodstains. Abby pretended to be terrified and claimed that she had argued with Bradley, after which he injured himself in protest. The police did not believe the girl, but allowed her to go to the hospital with the unconscious Bradley. The young man was urgently operated on, but the doctors were powerless to save his life. 22-year-old Bradley died at 1:30 a.m. on March 26th from massive blood loss caused by a single stab wound to the chest that hit his heart. The news of their son's death was a real shock for his parents. Now the investigation had to find out what really happened in the White Lewis house and who was to blame for the death of the young man. Friends and relatives of the couple said that on the eve of the tragedy, the relationship between Bradley and Abby was extremely tense. One of the deceased's friends reported that shortly before the incident, Bradley had confessed to him about having a new girlfriend, which probably could have greatly angered Abby. The police began to suspect her of committing the murder and took her into custody. During the first interrogation, Abby told her version of events. According to her, that evening she and Bradley had an argument, and the young man threatened to harm himself with a knife. The girl allegedly snatched the knife from him to throw it away and ran to the exit of the house. But Bradley caught up with her, grabbed her wrist, and plunged the blade into his chest. The investigators did not believe Abby and asked her many questions, which she refused to answer. The girl's version seemed absurd. After spending 2 months behind bars, Abby finally admitted her guilt in involuntary manslaughter and told what actually happened on March 25th. Back on March 19th, after the incident with Bradley's arm injury, the young man decided to break up with Abby. On March 25th, he invited the girl to meet in the park, where he informed her about the breakup. Abby was furious. At 5 p.m. that same day, the couple, together with friends Ryan and Louise, went to a local bar, and an hour later, the company moved to another establishment where they continued their leisure. At the bar, Abby was using prohibited substances and consuming alcohol in excess. Being in a bad mood, she was rude to the staff and visitors. At some point, Bradley and Ryan went to the bathroom where the young man burst into tears and confessed to his friend that he wanted to get as far away from Abby as possible, but was afraid to do so because of her threats to harm herself. While the friends were absent, Abby was rude to one of the bar patrons and even hit an unknown man, for which she received a slap in response and fell to the floor. A friend helped the girl get up and led her aside. When Bradley and Ryan returned to the table, Abby splashed a cocktail in the young man's face, began to publicly humiliate him, and accuse him of not standing up for her. In response to Ryan's request to calm down, the girl spat in his face. At 7:50 p.m., Bradley and Abby got into the car of an old acquaintance named Alfie, whom they met at the bar, and he drove them home. Alfie said that throughout the ride, the couple did not stop arguing. As soon as they drove up to the house, Abby quickly got out of the car and headed inside. Bradley sat in the car for a few more minutes, saying goodbye to his friend. His last words were, "I will die when I go home." This phrase alarmed Alfie, to whom the whole situation seemed strange and frightening. He left Bradley his phone number in case he needed help. After saying goodbye, Alfie left, and Bradley entered the house, where an enraged Abby was already waiting for him with a knife in her hands. During the argument, the girl dealt a fatal blow to the young man's chest. 20 minutes later, a neighbor called the emergency services. When examining Bradley's mobile phone, detectives found a huge number of messages from Abby. From the beginning of 2022, the girl had sent the young man hundreds of threats, so cruel that their content cannot be voiced. Before the trial, several psychiatrists spoke with Abby and concluded that she suffers from borderline personality disorder, is unable to control her anger, and is emotionally unstable. It also became known that a few days before the tragedy, the girl experienced severe stress, had an abortion, and learned from friends about Bradley's new relationship on the side. Experts did not find any signs of delusion, hallucinations, or other symptoms of psychosis in Abby. The jury deliberated for 12 hours and unanimously found 23-year-old Abby Gale White guilty of murder. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 18 years, that is, no earlier than 2040. Bradley's father called the loss of his son the greatest tragedy of his life, which caused him unspeakable grief and heartache. The young man's mother admitted that a part of her world was destroyed, and this wound would never heal. Custody of Bradley and Abby's children was taken by the parents of the deceased. Hundreds of caring people attended Bradley's funeral to support the Lewis family. In May 2022, the young man's body was cremated. The soccer club he played for held a friendly match in his memory. Hundreds of fans attended this event. The athletes supported the family of the deceased by giving Bradley's parents a portion of the collected funds in the amount of about £7,000 sterling. The rest of the money was transferred to a charitable organization that provides psychological support to men. Bradley's former coach, who had trained him in his youth, recalled his student with emotion as a kind and decent young man from childhood. He emphasized that he was saying these words not for the sake of propriety, but because that was exactly how Bradley was. The coach also noted the honesty and decency of the deceased's parents, with whom it was always pleasant to deal. As for Abby, she lost everything she had in life, her beloved family, home, things that many would give their lives for. Thank you for your attention. Please share your impressions of this story in the comments. Hey everyone, dear friends. This is Drake on the Crime Story Diaries channel. Today we'll be examining a horrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. Cassie Farrington was born on December 22, 1990 in the state of Virginia, USA. She was the second child in a family that also included 3 other growing children. Her parents, Darlene and Garrett, tried to give their daughter a good upbringing. They encouraged Cassie's passion for sports and her desire to do well in school. Cassie was indeed a diligent student. Teachers noted not only her hard work and good academic performance, but also her active lifestyle. The sociable and friendly girl readily made friends and participated in school activities. From an early age, Cassie had a dream: to become a doctor in order to help people. After graduating from high school, she planned to enroll in medical college and become a nurse. However, at the age of 16, an event took place that forever changed young Cassie's life. The girl met Bradley Farrington, a boy her own age. A whirlwind romance flared up, and soon Cassie realized she was pregnant. Bradley proposed to his beloved, as he apparently had the most serious of intentions. In 2008, immediately after finishing high school, the lovers secretly got married. Cassie left her parents' home in Virginia and moved in with her young husband in the small town of Silver City, New Mexico. There, the newlyweds began their independent life. Bradley joined the police force, while Cassie prepared to become a mother. At first, Cassie and Bradley's married life wasn't going badly. The young woman gave birth to their firstborn in 2009 and devoted herself completely to the child. At the same time, she didn't give up hope of getting a medical education. Cassie signed up for a distance learning program at a college, striving to combine her studies with raising her son. 3 years later, in 2012, Cassie gave birth to their second child. The responsibilities of caring for 2 kids in the household now fell on her shoulders. But the young mother didn't lose heart, dreaming of finishing college and getting a job as a nurse. To earn some extra money, Cassie even took a few night shifts at the Silver City Hospital. Meanwhile, cracks began to appear in the couple's relationship. Bradley, who was quite satisfied with being the sole breadwinner, started reproaching his wife for being too busy with her studies and work. In his opinion, a mother of 2 should stay at home and only deal with family matters. Over time, the reproaches turned into outright nitpicking and insults. Bradley increasingly raised his hands against Cassie, beating her under any pretext: an insufficiently clean floor, a cold dinner, or crying children. At first, the woman endured her husband's rudeness and physical abuse, considering herself to be at fault. She hoped that she would be able to please her spouse, thereby preserving the family. But Bradley's outbursts of aggression became more frequent. Now, it was the children's turn. He could yell at them for no reason, roughly grab their arm, or smack them upside the head. Cassie complained about her police officer husband to his colleagues, but they merely threw up their hands at the station. There was no evidence of domestic violence, apart from the victim's words. Moreover, Bradley enjoyed the respect of his co-workers. Realizing that there was no way to rein in the tyrant, Cassie decided to take a desperate step. She filed for divorce, took the children, and left her husband. Before leaving, a terrible conversation took place.
"You're not going anywhere," the enraged Bradley yelled. "I'll easily get rid of you and not face any punishment. All the cops are my friends. It's nothing for them to hush up the case, and the kids will go to me.
At the age of 22, Cassie found herself in the unenviable position of being a single mother with 2 children to support. She continued to take on shifts at the Silver City Hospital and worked nights as a caregiver, striving to provide her sons with everything they needed. The meager alimony payments that her ex-husband made reluctantly and irregularly were catastrophically insufficient. Cassie rented a small apartment together with her colleague Chanel. Both women understood that there was no other way out. Living alone and paying rent on a single salary was impossible in provincial Silver City. Leaving the children with a nanny, the young mothers worked around the clock. The ex-husband didn't leave Cassie alone. Learning of her plans to sue for increased alimony, Bradley began openly stalking his ex-wife. He called at all hours of the day and night, heaping curses and threats on the unfortunate woman, and one time, lying in wait for Cassie near her home, he forced her into his car and drove her off somewhere. Late in the evening, the frightened woman returned home in tears. To all of Chanel's questions, Cassie responded evasively, referring to a nervous breakdown due to the litigation with her ex-husband. Only after a few days did she confess to her roommate that Bradley had taken her out of town and brutally beaten her, threatening to kill her if she didn't give up her claims for alimony and the children. After this nightmarish incident, Cassie seriously feared for her life. She even wanted to leave Silver City and go wherever her eyes led her, but the mere thought of losing her job and roof over her head filled her with horror. And abandoning her beloved profession when she had only a year left until receiving her nursing diploma seemed like an unforgivable folly. During this difficult period in Cassie's life, a glimmer of hope appeared. She met David Barry, a modest, kind, and decent guy. The new boyfriend immediately endeared himself to the children, becoming a true friend to them. Cassie couldn't be happier with how quickly her sons became attached to their new dad. The brief experience of her first marriage, full of beatings and humiliation, made Cassie exercise caution. She observed David for a long time before finally trusting him completely. But the more the young people interacted, the more Cassie became convinced that she had finally met true love and a reliable life partner. In the spring of 2013, David proposed to his beloved. Without hesitation, Cassie agreed. They decided to have the wedding in August, right after the bride received her nursing diploma. The lovers made bright plans. They wanted to buy a spacious house for a large family and have a child together. Alas, Cassie's dreams of feminine happiness and domestic comfort were not destined to come true. The morning of March 24, 2014, did not portend trouble. As usual, Cassie finished her night shift at the hospital and was heading home. On the way, she called her mother and shared her plans to pick up her sons from daycare, take them to school, and get some much-needed sleep before her next shift. Darlene wished her daughter a good day. At noon, having finished her household chores, the woman decided to take a nap. And then the phone rang, making her blood run cold. The daycare teacher, where her grandsons went, anxiously reported that Cassie had not picked up the children and was not answering her phone. The concerned Darlene began calling all of her daughter's acquaintances and colleagues. To no avail. Cassie wasn't picking up. Then the mother remembered Chanel, the roommate who might have visited her friend. In a voice trembling with worry, Darlene asked the girl to go home and check on her daughter, in case she had fallen ill or was sound asleep. The alarmed Chanel rushed home. No one responded to her knocking. Instead, an ominous sound of running water came from inside, as if a pipe had burst. Entering the apartment with her own key, Chanel headed for the bathroom and froze. In the filled to the brim bathtub lay Cassie, her face submerged in the water. She was wearing the clothes she usually wore to work. Fighting the rising panic, Chanel pulled her friend's body out of the water. She tried to perform artificial respiration, cardiac massage, but in vain. Cassie wasn't breathing. Her skin was cold. Only then did it dawn on the frightened roommate that she was the first to discover a terrible crime. The medics who arrived at Chanel's call merely threw up their hands. They could only pronounce death, which had occurred about 5 hours ago. The young woman's body was taken to the morgue. The house was cordoned off by the police. Experts began examining the scene, hoping to clarify the circumstances of the death. Investigators noted a strange detail. In both bathrooms, the faucets were turned on full blast. Water had flooded the apartment floor, turning the dwelling into a kind of aquarium. It seemed the killer had deliberately staged a flood, trying to hide traces of the crime. On the floor lay Cassie's glasses and hair ties in disarray, along with a broken towel rack, eloquent evidence of a desperate struggle. Upon careful examination of the corpse, the criminal investigation expert discovered numerous bruises and contusions characteristic of strangulation, which was confirmed by the strangulation mark on her neck. Without waiting for the official autopsy results, the police proceeded to search for the killer. The circle of suspects narrowed to the victim's inner circle: her husband, family, friends, and acquaintances. After all, neither the locks nor the windows of the apartment had been broken into, so Cassie herself had let the killer in, not sensing the danger. The terrible news was conveyed to Cassie's parents by phone. Beside themselves with grief, Darlene and Garrett rushed to Silver City. At the police station, two frightened grandsons awaited them. The little ones couldn't understand why their beloved mother hadn't picked them up from daycare, and why everyone around them was crying, repeating that their mom was gone. The investigation into Cassie Farrington's murder was entrusted to local police detective Jose Sanchez. At first, he tried to work out the main leads and question potential witnesses. Apartment owner Chanel, the first to discover the body, had an alibi. She was at work at the time of the crime, which was confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The victim's fiancé GC, David Barry, was also quickly excluded from the list of suspects, as he was at his workplace under the observation of colleagues and cameras at the time of the murder. Chanel's husband, Billy, aroused the detective's suspicions with his strange behavior. After the murder, he took a carpet from the house and left for Alaska. But upon returning, he passed a polygraph test and convinced Sanchez of his non-involvement. Many witnesses in conversations with the detective repeatedly mentioned Cassie's complaints about her ex-husband Bradley, who stalked her, demanding that she give up alimony and threatening her with physical violence. Moreover, it turned out that police officer Bradley Farrington was well acquainted with Detective Sanchez. Despite such suspicious circumstances pointing to the ex-husband's likely involvement in the murder, Sanchez did not seriously consider Bradley as a suspect. Instead, he unexpectedly put forward a version about Cassie's suicide, despite obvious signs of a violent death and evidence of a struggle at the crime scene. This made Cassie's parents doubt the detective's competence and impartiality. With the help of the district attorney, they managed to have Sanchez removed from the case and a new investigator appointed. The case was taken over by young detective Jess Watkins. After studying the case files, she concluded that her predecessor had made a host of mistakes and omissions that could negatively affect the course of the investigation. In particular, Sanchez did not thoroughly examine the crime scene, did not question a number of potential witnesses, and hastily handed over the apartment to the owner for repairs and renting to new tenants. Watkins tried to correct her colleagues' oversights. She scrupulously studied Cassie's personality and biography, questioned her friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Many of them unanimously stated that the deceased had repeatedly complained about being stalked and threatened by her ex-husband Bradley, who served in the police force. A telling episode came to light. Shortly before her death, Cassie told her friends how Bradley had forcibly pushed her into his car, taken her out of town, and brutally beaten her, demanding that she give up alimony and custody of the children. He openly threatened to kill his ex-wife, hinting at his connections among fellow police officers who would help him avoid punishment. Watkins took Bradley Farrington seriously. Interesting facts emerged. It turns out that a few months before Cassie's murder, her ex-husband had been fired from the police force under suspicious circumstances, and on the day of the crime, he had a 2-hour period for which he had no alibi. The detective requested an analysis of the suspect's DNA and fingerprints and began to work out possible circumstantial evidence. These actions by the new investigator alarmed Bradley. He began to obstruct the investigation in every way possible, threatening Watkins with trouble at work, hinting at his connections in law enforcement. But Jess showed integrity and perseverance, continuing to methodically gather evidence of Farrington's guilt in the murder of his ex-wife. Cassie's shocking death, literally on the eve of her new wedding, could not be a coincidence. Detective Jess Watkins became convinced of this as she scrupulously studied all the circumstances of the tragedy. She also managed to obtain curious information about Bradley Farrington. It turns out that 6 months ago, the brave police officer had to resign at his own request, allegedly after a protracted conflict with the authorities related to disciplinary penalties. Rumor had it that the lieutenant had caught Farrington dozing at his post and dead drunk. He started an investigation, began collecting dirt on the negligent subordinate. Well, without thinking twice, he wrote a resignation report. In fact, the reason for Bradley's dismissal was much more prosaic. He was caught selling official information. As Watkins managed to find out, the valiant guardian of order had been leaking information about upcoming raids and searches to local thugs, both contraband, prostitution, underground casinos, and drug dens. He didn't disdain anything that could bring in an extra $1. When the first rumors began to circulate, Farrington's ill-wishers became restless. They had long suspected that Bradley's well-being was not based on a policeman's salary. Soon, the Internal Affairs Department received an anonymous tip about the lieutenant's unseemly dealings. And although the accused vehemently denied it, there was more than enough evidence against him. During the covert investigation, other crimes by Farrington were also revealed: violence against detainees, concealment of important evidence, falsification of criminal cases. It got to the point where the corrupt cop was supplying criminals with weapons and covering for the leaders of local gangs to avoid punishment. No wonder that with such patrons, Bradley held the law in contempt and considered himself invulnerable. Jess Watkins easily figured out the real reason why Cassie's ex-husband had committed the malfeasance. After the divorce, he lost access to his wife's money and got hooked on criminal earnings. After all, he had to somehow pay for mistresses, entertainment, not to mention gambling and expensive trinkets, without which the womanizer and carouser Bradley could not imagine his existence. As Watkins unraveled the tangle of Farrington's old and new villainies, her conviction grew regarding the scoundrel's involvement in Cassie's death. The connection between the cop's ruined career and the murder of his ex-wife was all too obvious. Bradley could easily have gained entry to her home, intimidated her, forced her to let him inside, and then brutally kill her, staging it as a suicide. After all, he had the keys to the apartment, which he refused to return despite all court orders. Moreover, during his years of service in law enforcement, Farrington had thoroughly studied forensics and learned to cover his tracks with virtuosity. He knew what experts paid attention to first when examining a crime scene. That's why he flooded the ill-fated bathroom with water, trying to wash away fingerprints and skin particles. And while the sluggish police conducted the initial examination, he vanished from the city in an unknown direction. But the meticulous Jess Watkins did not allow the villain to escape. She initiated a search through all databases and soon discovered that Farrington had flown to Mexico on false documents. Apparently, he was afraid of the heat and hastened to lie low, and at the same time, to wait out until the passion surrounding his murdered ex-wife subsided. Watkins spent a whole month arranging for a warrant for the suspect's arrest and extradition. The Mexican authorities cooperated, and now a haggard and rather battered by life, Bradley appeared before the investigator. During the interrogation, he denied everything as before, pretending to be an offended innocent. He allegedly left quite by accident, learning about the death of his ex-wife while already on vacation. But Watkins's ironclad arguments backed the liar into a corner. She presented the cop, confident in his invulnerability, with incontrovertible evidence, testimony from numerous witnesses about his erratic behavior before and after Cassie's murder, results of an independent forensic medical examination confirming the victim's violent death by strangulation, cell phone records exposing Farrington's lie regarding his whereabouts on the day of the tragedy. The tenacious investigator's main trump card, however, was footage from a neighboring house's security camera. The footage clearly shows Bradley entering Cassie's entryway on the morning of March 24th, and 2 hours later, right around the estimated time of death, leaving his ex-wife's house. Though the face is not discernible, the jacket and sneakers are the same ones he later wore when he flew to Mexico. The investigator also managed to find witnesses from the airport. They confirmed that on the day of his departure, Farrington looked extremely nervous and kept glancing around, as if he feared being followed or asked unwanted questions. Watkins knew for certain the villain was in a hurry to leave the crime scene before Cassie's body was discovered. At the face-to-face confrontation, Bradley continued to persist. He accused his ex-wife of slander and mudslinging, threatening Watkins with trouble at work. However, he broke down only when the detective placed before him the conclusion about the discrepancy between the DNA taken from his saliva and the skin particles extracted from under Cassie's nails. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to kill her, honest," Bradley sobbed. After that, all Watkins had to do was carefully record the murderer's confession. According to him, he came to his ex-wife early in the morning, allegedly to discuss the details of seeing the children on the upcoming weekend. The heated conversation smoothly transitioned into passionate embraces. Bradley still felt a strong attraction to Cassie. She flatly refused intimacy, stating that she was marrying someone else. In response, the enraged ex-husband called her a bad woman who had traded him for the first man she met. A scuffle ensued, in the heat of which the frenzied man knocked Cassie to the floor and began strangling her. She desperately resisted, scratched, tried to call for help, but the strength was unequal. After a few minutes, the woman went limp in the hands of the killer. Coming to his senses from the bloody frenzy, Bradley became frightened by what he had done. He quickly realized that he needed to cover his tracks and quietly slip away. He dragged his ex-wife's lifeless body into the bathtub, turned on the water. He hoped that the investigators would write off Cassie's death as a suicide or an accident. Now he understood how naive his calculations had been. At the trial, Bradley Farrington behaved defiantly. He bombarded the judge and jury with motions, challenged the evidence, accused witnesses of perjury. He claimed police brutality and incompetence of the investigation. He even tried to feign temporary insanity at the time of the murder. He allegedly did not know what he was doing, blinded by rage that clouded his mind. But the irrefutable evidence gathered by Jess Watkins did its job. By court decision, Bradley Farrington was found guilty of the premeditated murder of his ex-wife. Taking into account aggravating circumstances in the form of recidivism, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was announced, a ringing silence reigned in the courtroom. The relatives of the deceased Cassie wept quietly, from the pain of loss, from a sense of irreparable loss, but also from a barely perceptible relief. Justice had been done, and now the soul of the unfortunate woman would find peace, and her killer had earned the most severe punishment. After the trial of Bradley Farrington, custody of Cassie's orphaned sons, 4-year-old Jake and 2-year-old Kevin, was transferred by court order to their father's parents. The inconsolable grandmother and grandfather on the side of the deceased mother, Darlene and Garrett, tried to challenge this decision. They filed an appeal, stating their desire and moral right to raise and nurture their grandsons. As arguments, Cassie's relatives cited the fact that, unlike the Farringtons, who had virtually no involvement in the boys' lives, they constantly visited their daughter and grandsons, helped raise the little ones, took them for walks, to the zoo and the movies. Even after Cassie's tragic death, Darlene and Garrett tried not to leave the orphans without attention and care. They sent money for their support, bought clothes and educational toys. However, the appeals court upheld the decision unchanged. The official guardians of Cassie's children remained their paternal grandparents. Moreover, they made it clear to the relatives on the deceased's side that they would not allow them to see or communicate with their grandsons. They justified this by saying that they did not want to stir up the children's already wounded psyche with unnecessary reminders of their tragically deceased mother. Thus, Darlene and Garrett were deprived not only of their beloved daughter, but also of the opportunity to fully participate in the life and upbringing of her orphaned sons. At the time of the described events, it is unknown whether they managed to obtain permission to at least occasionally see their grandsons. One can only imagine how difficult it is for elderly people who have lost their only child to also be cut off from her children, who so remind them of the untimely departed Cassie. The story of Cassie Farrington is a vivid example of how even the closest people sometimes become the worst enemies. Bradley, once a loving husband and father, turned into a domestic tyrant and later a cold-blooded killer of the mother of his own children. District Police Officer Jose Sanchez, called upon to protect citizens, betrayed his duty by negligently investigating the murder case. Perhaps, if not for the tenacity of Detective Jess Watkins, this horrific crime would have remained unsolved. The most terrible thing is that the children, left without a mother due to their father's fault, are now also deprived of the opportunity to communicate with relatives who sincerely love them and are ready to take care of them. At their young age of not even 5 and 3 years old, the boys have already experienced the pain of losing the closest person, and now they are forced to grow up with indifferent guardians who prevent their meetings with loving grandparents. One can only hope that over time, the hearts of the Farringtons will soften, and they will allow Cassie's grandsons to see their mother's relatives, that the boys' lives will turn out as well as possible, despite all the adversities that have befallen them at such a young age, and that the memory of a loving mother, who even after the divorce did everything for their happiness, will help them grow up to be decent people. And Darlene and Garrett are left to continue the court battle for the right to participate in the upbringing of their grandsons. For the sake of the bright memory of their daughter, who dreamed that her children would grow up in an atmosphere of love and care. And for the sake of the hope that justice will someday still prevail, that the criminal who destroyed their family will bear the deserved punishment and will never be able to harm his children, and that Cassie, innocently killed at the hands of a domestic tyrant, will find peace in heaven. Her inconsolable parents believe that there on high, their beloved daughter invisibly watches over her orphaned boys, and prays to God that everything will be all right for her little ones. Darkness enveloped the outskirts of the city of Greenville, Tennessee, USA. It was Sunday, April 6th, 1997. The silence of the evening streets was shattered by sounds that were hard to mistake for anything else.
Gunshots.
Law enforcement officers immediately rushed to the scene, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding or someone hunting deer out of season. But what they saw would be forever etched in their memory. On the side of the road, in a shallow ditch, lay the bodies of 4 people, a man, a woman, and 2 small children. They were stacked on top of each other, as if someone had tried to hide the traces of a horrific crime. Blood was everywhere, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air. The police immediately called for backup and an ambulance, although they understood that for most of the victims, it was already too late. They carefully approached the bodies, trying to understand what had happened here. The family had been killed by gunshots. Law enforcement officers had never seen anything like this in all their years of service. Who could have committed such a brutal murder of an entire family, including innocent children? What evil had settled in this quiet town? While some officers tried to provide assistance to the wounded boy, others were already examining the crime scene in search of clues. Nearby, they found an abandoned car, an old blue Chevrolet. The doors were open, and the interior was in disarray, as if someone had been in a hurry to grab their things and flee. This was the first clue in an investigation that shocked all of America. Who were these mysterious killers? What drove them to commit such a heinous act? And would they be caught before they could harm other innocent people? Law enforcement officers were yet to delve into the dark world of religious fanaticism, drugs, and boundless cruelty. The investigation of this crime would become a real test for the entire city, and the shocking details of this case would haunt its residents for a long time to come. The story of the Lillet family began far from the quiet town of Greenville, where their lives were so tragically cut short. The head of the family, Vidar Lillet, was born in the small Norwegian town of Bergen. At the age of 20, he took a bold step, leaving his native home and heading to the United States of America in search of a better life. Vidar was the youngest of 4 children in his family. From a young age, he was known for his modesty, benevolence, and dreamy nature. The young man had always aspired to create his own happy family and provide them with a bright future. It was this dream that led him to Florida, where he hoped to start a new life. In the United States, fate brought Vidar together with Delphine, a girl who was born in March 1969 in New Jersey. A spark ignited between the young people, and they quickly realized that they were made for each other. The couple decided to move to Miami, and in February of the following year after they met, they got married. In 1991, the young couple welcomed their firstborn, a girl they named Tabitha. Vidar and Delphina were over the moon with happiness, but soon realized that the hustle and bustle of the big city was not what they desired. They dreamed of a peaceful life in a cozy town where they could raise their children in an atmosphere of love and security. That's how the Lillalids ended up in Powell, a suburb of Knoxville, Tennessee. It was a typical American town with picturesque scenery, friendly residents, and a measured pace of life. Vidar and Delphina felt they had finally found a place they could call home. In 1995, the family grew with another member, a boy named Peter. The Lillalids decided it was time to settle in a more spacious house where everyone would have their own room. They purchased a cozy little house built back in the 1940s and enthusiastically began arranging their new nest. Even though the house needed repairs, Vidar and Delphina spared no effort or time to turn it into a comfortable home. They dreamed of a happy future for their children and were ready to do anything for it. Delphina worked at a local restaurant and dedicated her free time to raising Tabitha and Peter. Vidar worked tirelessly to provide for his family. The Lillalids were deeply religious people and sought to raise their children in accordance with their beliefs. They regularly attended church and took an active part in the life of the religious community. In April 1997, the couple, along with their children, went to a large-scale convention of believers, hoping to strengthen their faith and find new like-minded people. None of them could have imagined that this trip would be fatal for them, that instead of the long-awaited spiritual unity, they would face the most terrible nightmare of their lives, and that their dreams and hopes would be mercilessly trampled by the cruelty that lurked very close by. While the Lillalid family was approaching their tragic fate, a completely different story was unfolding at the Columbia Motel, located near Knoxville. It was here that a company of young people from Kentucky, who were destined to become the perpetrators of a horrible crime, found refuge. The leader of this group was 18-year-old Natasha Cornett, a girl with a difficult past and a troubled psyche. With her were her best friend, 17-year-old Karen Howell, 20-year-old Joseph Reisner, 14-year-old Jason Bryant, 19-year-old Edward Dean Mullins, and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill. All of them came from dysfunctional families where violence, alcoholism, and drug addiction reigned. From an early age, these teenagers experienced cruelty, neglect, and abuse from their closest relatives. Their souls were wounded, and their hearts were filled with pain and anger at the whole world. Natasha Cornett considered herself a servant of Satan and claimed to hear the voices of demons in her head. She dreamed of unleashing a kind of Armageddon and taking revenge on society for all her suffering. The girl managed to rally around her equally lost and embittered like-minded people who were looking for the meaning of life in the occult and violence. Together, they conducted dark rituals, used drugs and alcohol, and cut their veins in search of painful euphoria. The walls of their motel rooms were painted with pentagrams and satanic symbols. This company had completely rejected all moral and social norms, plunging into an abyss of hatred and cruelty. April 1997 became a point of no return for them. On the 4th, they checked into the Columbia Motel, intending to turn their perverted fantasies into reality. They had stolen weapons and money, preparing for their crusade against the world they hated. On April 6th,
The same day the Lillelid family was returning from the Convention of Believers, Cornet's gang went out hunting. They were looking for victims on whom they could vent all their rage and evil. And fate brought them together with the Lillelids at the most tragic moment. When Delphina and her daughter came out of the restroom at the gas station, they accidentally ran into Natasha and Karen. The two girls in dark clothes and flashy makeup immediately caught the attention of the God-fearing mother. Delphina offered them religious brochures and invited them to an impromptu picnic, not realizing that she was talking to predators in human form. The members of Cornet's gang, seeing the Lillelids and their cozy family van, felt they had found the perfect victims for their twisted plans.
An ominous idea hatched in their heads: to kidnap the family, take them to a deserted place and arrange a bloody massacre. They already saw themselves as ruthless avengers who would bring death and suffering to this world. No one present at that gas station even suspected what a terrible drama had unfolded in a matter of minutes. How behind the feigned friendliness and smiles lurked the darkest darkness of human hearts, and that an innocent family found itself at the epicenter of an insane nightmare that would forever change the life of a small town. When Natasha Cornet's gang joined the Lillelid family for an impromptu picnic, no one could have imagined the horrific plan that was brewing in their heads. Under the guise of feigned goodwill hid true monsters, ready to do anything for their perverted desires. Joseph Reisner and Jason Bryant were the first to approach the table where Vidar, Delphina, and their children were sitting. They struck up a casual conversation, trying to gain the trust of their future victims. At this time, Natasha and Karen were returning from the restroom, where they had last discussed the details of their sinister plan. Soon, Edward Mullins and Crystal Sturgill, who had been waiting in the car, joined the company. They brought with them the previously stolen weapons, 9mm and .25 caliber pistols. None of the picnickers even suspected that behind the backs of these young people lurked mortal danger. Suddenly, Joseph's friendly demeanor changed. He slowly pulled out a gun and pointed it at Vidar, ordering the entire family to stay put. At that moment, the Lillelid's world split into before and after. Fear and confusion gripped them as they realized they were in the hands of armed criminals. At gunpoint, the bandits forced the Lillelids into their own van. Vidar begged to at least let the children go, offering money and the car instead. But for Natasha and her henchmen, human life had no value. They were determined to see their bloody plan through to the end. Vidar himself took the wheel of the van with the armed Joseph sitting next to him, holding the man at gunpoint. The rest of the gang settled in the cabin, watching over the terrified hostages. Following the van into the unknown was the old Chevrolet, with Edward and Crystal inside. The atmosphere inside the van was tense to the extreme. Delphina tried to calm 6-year-old Tabitha, who was quietly sobbing, clinging to her mother. Little Peter, who was only 2 years old, did not yet understand what was happening, but felt the fear and anxiety of the adults. After a few kilometers, the van turned onto a dirt road and stopped in the middle of a deserted area. The bandits led the Lillelids out of the cabin, shoving them in the back with the barrels of their pistols. The family held hands tightly, whispering prayers and begging God for salvation. But nothing could stop the enraged fanatics who were ready to do anything for their perverted ritual. They roughly pushed the Lillelids apart and forced them to their knees. Vidar and Delphina desperately pleaded for mercy, promising to keep quiet about everything that had happened. But in the eyes of their tormentors, there was nothing but cold determination and sadistic pleasure. Shots rang out one after another, shattering the night silence and forever changing the life of the small town. The blood of innocent victims mingled with hot tears and screams of despair. And somewhere in the darkness, many miles from this terrible place, people were calmly going to bed, not even suspecting what tragedy had just occurred. The shots that rang out that terrible night forever changed the life of the small town of Greenville. The brutal murder of the Lillelid family came as a real shock to the entire community, which had never before faced such a display of violence and hatred. Thanks to the vigilance of a worker who heard the shots and saw suspicious activity on the deserted road, The police quickly arrived at the crime scene, but the picture that opened up before their eyes was forever etched in the memory of even the most experienced officers. On the ground lay the bodies of Vidar, Delfina, and their young children, bloodied and mutilated by numerous bullet wounds. Only 2-year-old Peter miraculously survived, despite severe injuries. The police immediately called an ambulance and began pursuing the criminals in hot pursuit. Thanks to prompt work and a lucky break, the bandits were apprehended at the Mexican border, where they were trying to escape in the stolen Lillelid van. 6 young people, Natasha Cornett, Karen Howell, Joseph Reisner, Jason Bryant, Edward Mullins, and Crystal Sturgill, stood trial on charges of kidnapping, armed robbery, and brutal murder. During the investigation and trial, they tried to shift the blame onto each other, making up nonsensical versions of events and accusing the youngest member of the gang, 14-year-old Jason, of everything. But all the evidence pointed to the fact that each of them played a role in this horrible crime. Even if not everyone directly pulled the trigger, they were accomplices who did nothing to stop the bloodshed. Under the pressure of irrefutable evidence and the threat of the death penalty, the criminals made a deal with the investigation. They pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This verdict sparked outrage in the local community, which demanded the death penalty for the killers. But the law is the law, and the court made its decision. Meanwhile, little Peter, the only one who survived this terrible tragedy, was fighting for his life in the hospital. He underwent numerous surgeries and a long period of rehabilitation, trying to recover from physical and emotional wounds. The boy lost an eye forever, but kept the life that became both a gift and a burden for him. After his recovery, Peter faced another battle. His relatives on his father's and mother's sides were arguing over custody of him. In the end, the court decided that the boy should move to Sweden, to his aunt on his father's side. There, far from the scene of the tragedy, he was to get a chance at a new life and heal his emotional wounds. Years passed, but the residents of Greenville still could not recover from what had happened. Each anniversary of that terrible night was marked by a silent procession with candles and prayers for the repose of the souls of the dead. People tried to understand how this could have happened in their quiet town and what drove the young killers to commit such a heinous crime. The truth about the events of that night may forever remain a mystery, buried in the conflicting testimonies of the criminals. But the memory of the Lillelid family, loving parents and their young children, will forever remain in the hearts of the people of Greenville. Their tragedy became a reminder of the fragility of human life and how easily evil can creep into the most unexpected places. Many years have passed since that fateful day that forever changed the life of little Peter Lillelid. The boy grew up, overcoming the pain and suffering that had befallen him. He found the strength to return to the USA, to the country that had taken away his dearest people. Peter started his own family and built a successful career trying to live a full life despite the burden of the past. He often thought of his parents and sister, dreaming of how proud they could be of him today. Every year on the anniversary of the tragedy, Peter would come to Greenville to honor the memory of his family and pray at their grave. He met with people who remembered his parents and thanked them for the support and sympathy they had shown all these years. Peter knew that nothing could bring back his lost family, but he also understood that the best way to honor their memory was to keep living, loving, and spreading light to those around him. He became a living symbol of hope and the indomitable human spirit in the face of the most terrible trials. And although the wounds on his body and soul would never completely disappear, Peter found the strength to forgive and let go of the past. He realized that revenge and hatred only destroy, and true strength lies in the ability to love and empathize, no matter what. Peter Lillelid's story has become a reminder to all of us that even in the darkest times, there is always room for hope and love, and that even the most terrible tragedies cannot destroy the strength of the human spirit if we do not allow evil to triumph in our hearts. Years have passed since Alyssa Burkett's life was tragically cut short. Her daughter Willow has grown up in a loving family, surrounded by the care of her grandparents. Each year on Alyssa's birthday, they visit her grave, remembering her beauty, kindness, and boundless love. The memory of Alyssa lives on in the hearts of her loved ones, in every beat of little Willow's heart. And while the pain of loss will never fade, they know Alyssa will always be with them in their thoughts, actions, and hopes for a better future. Her story is a sad but important reminder of how fragile life is and how important it is to appreciate loved ones while they are close by. Alyssa Ann Burkett was born on the 31st of December 1995 in Mesquite, Texas, to Teresa Ann Burkett and Joshua Forsyth. She had 3 sisters, Nikki, Madison, and Taylor, and 2 brothers, Landon and Tyler. From a young age, Alyssa displayed creative inclinations. At the age of 7, she dreamed of becoming a fashion designer and crafting her own clothing. She enthusiastically sketched designs for future outfits. Her grandfather, Russell Forsyth, a songwriter, encouraged his granddaughter's passion and hoped she would continue his legacy. However, at the age of 13, Alyssa changed her plans and decided to pursue a career in law. She explained to her grandfather that she enjoyed arguing and felt a calling in it. Russell supported his granddaughter's choice, albeit warning about the necessity of diligent study on this path. After graduating from Royce City High School, Alyssa enrolled in a local college. At 18, she discovered she was expecting a child with her boyfriend, Andrew Bird, who was 9 years her senior. This unplanned pregnancy caught Alyssa off guard and compelled her to reassess her life plans. Alyssa parted ways with Andrew, deciding to raise her daughter on her own. She dropped out of college and dedicated herself entirely to motherhood. On the 31st of December 2019, her 24th birthday, Alyssa gave birth to a healthy baby girl whom she named Willow. Despite the challenges, Alyssa strived to be an exemplary mother. Her relatives noted that she wanted to provide her daughter with a stable and loving family, a privilege she was deprived of in her own childhood due to her parents' divorce. On her social media platforms, Alyssa appeared vivacious and open. She shared family photos, thoughts, and interests. Those close to her described her as straightforward, energetic, with a heart of gold and a radiant smile. Alyssa worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. She was an assistant at a real estate firm and an employee at a management company. At the time of her demise, she was working at Greentree, a residential real estate company. She was stubborn, determined, sometimes selfish, but you couldn't stay mad at her for long. She had eternal beauty and charm, reminisced her grandfather Russell. He and the entire family were devastated when Alyssa's life tragically ended at the age of 24. Alyssa Burkett met Andrew Bird in her teenage years. He was 9 years her senior and appeared as a mysterious, bad boy. Despite the protests of her relatives, Alyssa began to court him. The relationship was unstable and complex. Bird did not work and relied on Alyssa for support, yet he was possessive, causing scenes and monitoring every move of the young woman. Friends advised her to break up with him multiple times, but she always returned. In January 2019, 23-year-old Alyssa discovered she was pregnant with Bird's child. She decided to keep the baby, although she doubted Andrew as a future father. Eventually, she left him, choosing to raise her daughter on her own. On December 31st, 2019, Alyssa gave birth to a girl named Willow. With the help of her family, especially her grandparents, she tried to provide her daughter with a peaceful childhood and kept Baird away, deeming him unreliable. However, Baird was unwilling to back down. He initiated a fierce legal battle for custody of Willow, declaring he would achieve his goal at any cost, stating that nothing will stop him. Alyssa feared retaliation from his side. In April 2020, just 4 months after Willow's birth, a new woman entered Andrew's life, 22-year-old Holly Elkins. Elkins quickly moved in with Bird and began making plans for their life together and raising his daughter.
The appearance of the young stepmother only intensified the conflict. Elkins saw Alyssa as a rival and actively sought to eliminate her from Bird's life. She positioned herself as the perfect mother for Willow. Alyssa felt a growing threat from her ex-boyfriend and his fiancée, C. Friends advised her to be cautious and wary of the worst. Little did she know that her life would soon be cut short by their hands. Shortly after Andrew Bird and Holly Elkins started their relationship, they launched a full-scale campaign to persecute Alyssa Burkett.
Their aim was to completely destroy her reputation and strip her of parental rights to gain full custody of Bird's daughter, Willow. In her messages, Elkins openly expressed her obsession with removing Alyssa as a mother. She wrote to Bird that Alyssa controls him, puts him first, and that he must show his submission to his ex and deal with this mess. Elkins insulted Alyssa,
calling her a liar, stupid, and a bad mom.
She instigated Bird, claiming that Alyssa stood in the way of their happy family life with Willow and urged him to take radical actions. One instance of slander was not enough for Elkins. Together with Bird, they installed a GPS tracker on Alyssa's car, monitoring her every move. Elkins then anonymously called 911, falsely reporting Alyssa for allegedly driving erratically, trying to discredit her to the police. Another time, Elkins went to the police and falsely accused Alyssa's mother of attacking her. To corroborate her story, she even deliberately scratched her own chest. The couple hired a private detective to find dirt on Alyssa and her new partner. Although the investigator found nothing incriminating, Bird and Elkins persisted. In September 2020, they themselves planted drugs and unregistered weapons in Alyssa's car and anonymously informed the police that Alyssa was allegedly dealing drugs from her trunk. During questioning, Alyssa tearfully insisted she had no involvement with drugs. She immediately suspected Bird's involvement, trying to tarnish her in the eyes of child services and the police. Unfortunately, she couldn't prove it. The persecution took on an increasingly menacing tone. A week before the murder, Elkins wrote to Bird, "I hope you can handle this." She demanded that he go or die for her, clearly hinting at the impending crime. Unbeknownst to herself, Alyssa was in mortal danger. She had only a few days left to live. Following direct instructions from his fiancée C.E. Holly Elkins, Andrew Bird began the direct preparation for the murder of Alyssa Burkett. They acted deliberately and methodically, planning every detail of the crime. On September 10, 2020, just 3 weeks before the tragedy, Elkins accompanied Bird to a sporting goods store. There, he purchased a black raincoat in cash, which he would later use in the attack. Elkins clearly assisted him in selecting suitable attire for the crime. On September 14th, they visited a pharmacy, where Elkins bought dark foundation and other cosmetics for makeup. Evidently, she planned to disguise Bird to hinder his identification by witnesses. Later, the police would find this makeup in Bird's car, along with wipes containing traces of makeup. On September 19th, the couple visited a hardware store, where they bought shotgun shells and a large Camillus knife. It was this shotgun and knife that Bird would soon use to carry out his vengeance on the mother of his daughter. Over the past week of September, Elkins inundated Bird with messages, goading him to put the plan into action. She wrote that they needed to deal with this, go or die. Elkins explicitly stated that their relationship would be at risk if he did not follow through to the end. Receiving a clear signal, Bird got down to business. The search history on his phone shows that he began looking for information on how to remove gunpowder residue from his hands after a shot. He clearly did not want to leave any traces. 6 days before the attack, Bird bought a used black Ford Expedition advertised. He planned to use it for surveillance on Alyssa and as transportation to the crime scene. The seller later identified Bird as the buyer. A day before the attack, Bird attached a homemade silencer to his .22 caliber pistol. Although he ultimately did not use it in the attack, the mere fact of making the silencer demonstrates the purposefulness of his actions. Finally, on the morning of October 2nd, Bird disguised himself as an African American, donned a black raincoat, and headed to Alyssa's house in a parked SUV nearby. Thanks to Elkins's messages, he knew the victim's daily routine and could anticipate where to find her. The plan was set. Bird and Elkins had considered all the details. They were prepared to ruthlessly execute the mother of 1.5-year-old Willow in broad daylight. There was no turning back. On the morning of October 2nd, 2020, nothing foreshadowed the tragedy. 24-year-old Alyssa Burkett, as usual, dropped off her 1.5-year-old daughter Willow at her grandmother's and headed to work at the Green Tree Homes Management Company in Carrollton. She parked her car in front of the office around 9 a.m. and was about to enter the building. At that moment, a black SUV sped towards her car at full speed. A man in a black cloak with a hood and a mask covering his face jumped out of it. In his hands, he held a short-barreled shotgun. Without giving Alyssa time to react, the attacker approached closely and shot her in the head through the side window. Alyssa slumped over the steering wheel, her face and hair drenched in blood. The killer rushed back to his car, intending to flee. However, at that moment, although fatally wounded, Alyssa managed to open the door and almost fall out of the car onto the asphalt. With some incredible force of will, she crawled towards the office door, trying to call for help. A bloody trail followed her. Noticing the movement, Bird swiftly turned around. He pulled out a large hunting knife from under his cloak and lunged towards Alyssa, writhing on the ground. Grabbing her by the hair, he viciously began stabbing her in the neck, chest, and abdomen. In total, Bird inflicted no fewer than 13 stab wounds. From the injuries sustained, Alyssa died on the spot. When her colleagues, hearing the screams, rushed out to the parking lot, they found Alyssa in a pool of blood, her throat slashed. They tried to perform CPR, but in vain. By that time, Bird had already fled in his black SUV, leaving the bloodied knife on the parking lot. Random witnesses described the assailant as a tall, muscular man dressed in all black, with a mask or hood on his head. Many mistook him for an African American. At the time of the attack, Holly Elkins, according to her own words, was at home with Bird's daughter, Willow. Thus, she had an alibi. Later, she told the police that Bird allegedly was with her all this time, which turned out to be a lie. The brutal daylight murder in a crowded place shocked the residents of Carrollton. They were puzzled about the motives of the criminal. However, Alyssa's relatives and friends immediately suspected Andrew Bird. They were aware of the protracted conflict between the former partners and feared the worst. Alyssa's mother, barely holding back tears, informed the police of her suspicions regarding Bird. She recounted his threats and obsession with her daughter, the prolonged legal battle for custody of her granddaughter. According to her, Bird had repeatedly stated that the living Alyssa Willow would not get. Thus began one of the most shocking and resonant trials in the history of Texas. A trial that made local residents rethink, seemingly, the familiar issue of domestic violence and stalking. The name of Alyssa Burkett will long be remembered as a symbol of maternal love and resilience in the face of cruelty. The investigation into Alyssa Burkett's murder began with questioning witnesses at the crime scene. Alyssa's colleagues detailed the appearance and actions of the assailant. Although he wore a mask, his tall stature and muscular build stood out. Some mistakenly took him for an African American. The testimonies of Alyssa's relatives about the prolonged conflict with her former partner, Andrew Bird, immediately made him the prime suspect. Friends and colleagues of Alyssa spoke of his obsession, constant surveillance, and threats. Alyssa's new boyfriend recalled that Bird mentioned their full home addresses, although they had not disclosed this information to him. Detectives began surveillance of Bird's house in Rowlett. Soon they noticed Bird, accompanied by his fiancée CEE Holly Elkins and daughter Willow, carrying suitcases and bags out of the house, clearly preparing to leave for a long time. When Bird got into the car, the police stopped him on the pretext of lacking a license plate. During the search of the car, men's boots cut into pieces and soaked in bleach were found. Also discovered were remnants of camouflage makeup, napkins with makeup, and burnt parts of a brush for its application. In Baird's house, detectives found even more evidence. Primarily batteries for GPS trackers that the criminal attached to the cars of Alyssa and her boyfriend. There was also a homemade silencer for a pistol and a whole arsenal of weapons. But the main discovery was a written script that Bird used when calling the police to report drugs in Alyssa's car. The police seized 3 phones from Baird, including a disposable one.
In the search history of one of them, there were inquiries on how to remove gunpowder residue from hands. He was clearly trying to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city, an abandoned black Ford Expedition SUV was discovered. In the cabin, forensic experts found Alyssa's blood and fibers of a fake beard with Andrew's DNA. The car seller identified Bird as the buyer and remembered that he paid in cash and was in a hurry. Forensic examination revealed that the bullet that killed Alyssa was fired from the sawed-off shotgun found in the car. Bird's fingerprints were also found on the handle of a hunting knife. His handwriting was clearly identifiable in the GPS devices and in the calls with false accusations. It seemed that the prosecution had gathered comprehensive evidence of Andrew Bird's guilt. However, the prosecutors also aimed to hold his accomplice, Holly Elkins, accountable. Electronic correspondence between them came to the rescue, showing Elkins' role in planning and inciting the crime. The investigation lasted for several months. During this time, the prosecution meticulously assembled a mosaic of evidence, unequivocally incriminating the ruthless killers of Alyssa Burkett. The jurors were shocked by the cynicism and calculated nature of the criminals. They eagerly awaited the start of the trial to deliver a just verdict. The trial for the murder of Alyssa Burkett began in June 2022, almost 2 years after the tragedy. Sitting in the dock were 35-year-old Andrew Bird and his 23-year-old fiancée, Holly Elkins. They were charged with stalking, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. From the outset, the prosecutors made it clear that they intended to seek the maximum punishment for both defendants. In their opening statement, they painted a picture for the jurors of a massive conspiracy to take the life of a young mother. The correspondence between Baird and Elkins left no doubt about the meticulous planning of the crime. A key prosecution witness was Christopher Mayo, Alyssa's boyfriend at the time of her death. He told the jurors about months of harassment and persecution orchestrated by Bird and Elkins against them. According to him, Alyssa had mentioned multiple times that Baird seemed like someone capable of killing her. Mayo recounted the phone threats, constant surveillance, and attempts to discredit Alyssa in the eyes of social services and the police. He stated that Elkins was the puppet master, directing Bird's actions. Her pathological jealousy and obsession with another's child ultimately led to the tragedy. Colleagues and friends of Alyssa shared the grief of the slain mother. Alyssa had confided in them, expressing fear of her unstable ex, feeling constantly watched. A few days before her death, she told a friend, "If something happens to me, know that Andrew did it." Forensic experts presented the jurors with a rich arsenal of physical evidence, unequivocally linking Bird to the crime scene. In addition to DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapons, there were traces of gunpowder and disguise fragments in his house and car. However, the nail in the coffin of the trial was the electronic correspondence between Baird and Elkins, eloquently demonstrating their joint plans. Phrases like, "I hope you can handle this," "Do it or die for me," "This B***, teach must disappear," littered their messages in the days leading up to the murder. Bird's defense attempted to argue for the lack of premeditation in his actions. Supposedly, he only intended to scare his ex, but in a fit of rage, miscalculated his force. The defense emphasized the emotional distress and stress from the prolonged legal battle, but the correspondence and meticulous preparation for the crime completely refuted these speculations. Particularly telling were Bird's internet searches on removing gunpowder traces. Such actions do not align with those of someone who accidentally turned to violence. Elkins outright denied her involvement, citing an alibi. However, even here, her position was woven with white lies. Messages where she urged her partner to deal with the rival literally put a nail in the coffin of her innocence, at least in incitement. In the end, Bird admitted guilt on the main points. Apparently, he decided to mitigate his fate, avoiding a life sentence. He detailed, albeit quite impassively, the circumstances of the murder, his preparation, and motives. His key motive was an obsession with Willow, his daughter. Elkins stood her ground to the end. Even after the guilty verdict, she continued to proclaim her innocence and the injustice of the sentence. However, this did not help her escape a harsh punishment. In May 2023, the judge pronounced the verdict. Andrew Bird received 43 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. Holly Elkins was sentenced to 20 years for complicity. The courtroom erupted in applause. Justice, albeit delayed, prevailed. The killers of Alyssa Burkett received their due. The loved ones of Alice, with tears in their eyes, expressed gratitude to the prosecutors and jurors. Nothing will bring back our girl, but we are thankful that the guilty have been punished and no one else will suffer at their hands, said Alice's mother to the journalists. This tragedy will serve as a bitter lesson for all victims of domestic violence for a long time. The untimely and cruel death of Alice Burkett shook the residents of Texas and the entire America. A young mother, beloved daughter and sister, she was killed in the most despicable and inhumane manner by the hands of her former partner and the father of her child.
Her story became a tragic symbol of the epidemic of domestic violence, claiming thousands of lives annually. Despite the just verdict for the killers, Alice's family does not hide. Their loss is irreplaceable. She was a ray of light in our lives, recalls her mother Teresa. Determined, with a huge loving heart, she lived for her daughter and dreamed of giving her the best. Most painful was the fact that Alice sensed the danger and repeatedly reported it to her loved ones and the police. Alas, no one took her words seriously until it was too late. Perhaps more decisive intervention could have prevented the tragedy. She told me, "Mom, he will kill me, I know." But what could I do? The police shrugged, saying, "Until he does something, we are powerless." Alice's Aunt Shelley shares in tears. Particular concern arises for Alice's daughter, 2-year-old Willow. She lost her mother at such a tender age and will surely not fully grasp the extent of her loss for a long time. Custody of the girl was granted to her maternal grandparents. They vowed to do everything to ensure Willow grows up in love and never forgets her mother. Every day I show her photos of Alice, tell her how wonderful she was. Willow is still young, but she already reaches for the pictures, caressing them with her finger. Despite everything, we will continue to live on, for her, says Alice's grandmother, Teresa Ann. Alice's story raises uncomfortable yet critically important questions. Why do signals of domestic violence victims often go unnoticed? How can we improve the protection and response system to complaints? What prevents us all from being more vigilant about the problems of friends and family? Experts urge early recognition of warning signs of abusive relationships, pathological jealousy, control, isolation from friends and family, outbursts of aggression. Victims need to know they are not alone and can seek help at any time by contacting hotlines or crisis centers. The most important thing is not to remain silent, not to tolerate, not to consider it normal. Violence is never acceptable, and it rarely stops on its own. Alice was strong, but even the strong sometimes need help, emphasizes psychologist Anna Byers, leading a support group for abuse survivors. Alice's death should not be in vain. Her case once again shows how important it is to take threats and signs of violence seriously, especially when the well-being of children is at stake. No family drama is worth a lost life. The name of Alice Burkett will forever remain in the memory of her loved ones and fellow citizens. Her photos and posts on social media continue to gather likes, comments, and words of support even years after the tragedy. Many see in her an example of resilience and dedication to loved ones despite all trials. Rest in peace, dear Alice. You will forever remain in our hearts. We will continue your work and love Willow as you loved her. Justice has prevailed, and now you can rest peacefully. We will always remember your goodness, wrote her grandfather Russell on the first anniversary of her death. Perhaps someday in the future, Willow will be able to read these words and learn what an amazing woman her mother was. A woman who fought for her until her last breath and did not let her love fade, even in the face of monstrous cruelty. Her short but bright life will forever be an example for all mothers. Alice Burkett's story is not just another criminal chronicle. It is a tragedy of a young woman who only wanted one thing, to love and raise her daughter, but her life was cut short by those who vowed to protect her, her child's father and his new partner. Obsession, jealousy, desire for control, these were the true motives driving Andrew Bird and Holly Elkins. Neither pleas from Alice nor fear of the law,
nor thoughts of the well-being of little Willow stopped them. In pursuit of a sick passion, they crossed the final line. The most frightening thing is that Alice's case is just the tip of the iceberg. Hundreds of women across the country face domestic violence, harassment, and threats daily. Many are afraid to speak openly about it, considering their burden shameful. Unfortunately, the outcome of this silence can be fatal. Alice's example reminds us we must not turn a blind eye to signs of abuse in our own lives or the lives of our loved ones. Pathological jealousy is not love. Constant control is not care. And outbursts of aggression are not character. These are warning bells, SOS signals that cannot be ignored. If you have become a victim of domestic violence, know that you are not alone. There are people and organizations ready to lend a helping hand. Do not be afraid to take this step. Do not wait until the situation becomes deadly. Your safety and right to a life without fear are paramount above all other considerations. It is our collective responsibility to raise the younger generation in respect and acceptance.
To teach them to resolve conflicts with words, not fists or guns. To explain that love does not tolerate violence. Perhaps then our daughters will no longer perish at the hands of those they once let into their hearts. I don't know if Willow will ever understand why and for what her mother died, but I know for sure Alice loved her more than life. Her last thoughts were surely about her daughter. And there, in the heavens, she continues to watch over her little one, said her brother Landon at her funeral. Someday Willow will grow up and be able to read this story herself, the story of her mother's life, love, and struggle. May the memory of Alice be a source of strength and faith in a better future for her. And for all of us, a bitter lesson, a reminder, and a call to action. We owe it to her, we owe it to each other.